we've been looking at various ages of English poetry. Remember, we began with the Elizabethan age and Shakespeare. And now we move on to the age after that, which is called the Puritan age. Puritan, somber and pensive literature. It affected the politics, the religion, society of that period. All the theatres were shut and people were supposed to be serious with no entertainment. The important writers of this period, of course, are John Milton and John Bunyan. The poet is John Milton, 1625 to 1674. Most of us would remember him as the writer of the first epic in the English language. Remember? Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. He studied at Cambridge, and at some stage he even thought of joining the church, but continued to write poetry. One of his important poems was on his blindness, because sadly he became blind at a very young age. Other poems that we might recall are Lycidas, the great pastoral elegy, and Samson Agonistus, and many, many more. The poem that we are looking at today is Methought I Saw, my late espoused saint. Some people prefer the title On His Deceased Wife. Written in 1658 on the death of his second wife, Catherine Woodcock, 4 months after her delivery. Milton loved the sonnet as a genre, and he has written many other sonnets. My dear listeners, I'm sure you by now know what the sonnet is, the 14-lined poem which has been a favorite down the ages. So what is this poem about? The themes of afterlife, of loss, of reality when one is faced with death. Let me read some of the lines of the poem to you before we go along. Methought I saw my late espoused saint brought to me like Alcestis from the grave, whom Jove's great son to her glad husband gave, rescued from death by force, though pale and faint. Mine as whom washed from spot of childbed taint, purification in the old Lord did save, and such as yet once more I trust to have, full sight of her in heaven without restraint, came vested all in white, pure as the mind. I've read all the 8 lines, the octave to you at one go. I want you to understand that Milton was a kind of a serious poet. He had read a lot. He went to Cambridge, remember. He wanted to join the church, and he was a part of the Puritan age, and therefore his knowledge of Greek mythology was very good. The octave moves on to the sestet, where he continues to describe his wife as being beautiful, good. Even though she was veiled, he looked at her with all these ideas. And then we move on to the couplet, which is really touching. Because remember, it was a dream. She was already dead. And therefore, he wants to embrace her. He imagines that she bends towards him. But then it's a dream. And therefore, she fades away. And day brought back my night. What a strange irony. Actually, it's the end of night and it's the beginning of day. But for him, it seems to be the end of day, because he goes back once again into the darkness of sorrow, of the loss of his wife. The poem is a sonnet, and therefore we know it's 14 lines. A particular kind of rhyme scheme that each poet decides on is also there. It's what we call a Petrarchan sonnet. Remember, we have talked about the Shakespearean and the Petrarchan sonnet. One very popular in the Italian language, another in the English language. But Milton preferred the Petrarchan to the Shakespearean. We have alliteration. I'm not going to give you examples of alliteration. You know it's the repetition of the same sound in words which follow each other. There is also what we call enjambment. Isn't it interesting that many of these figures of speech keep coming again and again? So we have the line ending, but the meaning not ending, the punctuation not ending. I saw my late espoused saint brought to me, he says. The first line moves on into the second line. Another interesting figure of speech, which is the caesura, which comes from the word cease, to end. And that is where there are pauses in a line. My dear friends, it's very important to read poetry aloud, because that's when you get the real effect, whether it's the lyrical quality or whether it's figures of speech which have got to do with sound. For example, caesura, where there are pauses in a line indicated by punctuation marks. So as you read along, pause and then continue to get the full effect. And so that was a Petrarchan sonnet. How do we learn to appreciate poetry? By reading more poetry of the same kind. So come on, pick up your books or your Kindle or whatever you use and read more sonnets. Read Milton's famous sonnet on his blindness. Read Shakespeare's 154 sonnets, or the Romantics, or Sidney, or. Enjoy yourself reading sonnet after sonnet.